There is a theory, unproven but persistent, that men sense the hour of their death in advance, not as a foreboding or dream, but in the body, a twinge behind the eyes, a loosened tooth, a pulse like frost in the wrist. I am not dead, but at 6:03 p.m. last Tuesday, I recognized the beginnings of an ending. The steam from the kettle drew a pale line up the tile, and I had just enough time to notice the burn mark beneath the knob before the first phrase cut through my world. Soft divorce, Trev. No courthouse drama. We'll split the money quietly and keep him calm. Before we continue, please subscribe. It helps this reach someone who needs it. I flinched, not from pain, but from the neatness of the words. There was an echo, a memory of Diana's voice, my wife, the tone she used when telling the vet, "We don't want the dog to suffer, just a clean ending." I had heard her say soft only in contexts of mercy or tissue brands. To hear it paired with divorce was like finding a snake in a box of cotton balls. The speakerphone's squawk meant she was in the mudroom, a room adjacent but not sealed. Diana had always preferred open doors. "He's not a risk," she continued. "He'll just want facts and a checklist. If we map it for him, it'll be smooth." Trevor's reply came through tinny and practiced, the voice of someone for whom every problem was a spreadsheet. "We do it the way we discussed. No delays. I'll handle the account disclosures." There was a hiss as the kettle, forgotten, reached boil. The lid rattled, bucked, settled. I turned off the flame and let the silence flood back in. The celery was abandoned in strict quarters on the cutting board, lined up like fallen dominoes. My marriage was ending, but my first feeling was not sorrow. It was admiration for the efficiency, the way they anticipated my needs, the neatness of their betrayal. My body, always a reliable recorder of subtle change, logged this moment with the precision of a double-entry ledger. Date, time, location, exact phraseology. The heart kept pace with an unfamiliar rhythm, slow but insistent, as if buffering the shock for later review. Diana re-entered the kitchen as though nothing had transpired. She had a way of gliding over thresholds, never pausing, as if in every room she was a guest of her own home. "Soup?" she said, glancing at my abandoned mise en place. "I was going to offer takeout." My treat. I nodded, careful to steady my hands. She noticed the knob was still warm and wrapped a towel around it before draining the kettle. She was always thinking ahead, risk-managing burns and slips even in betrayal. I studied the line of her jaw, the way she folded the towel with quick, tight turns. I realized, with a pang both petty and profound, that I would miss her capacity for order most of all. She thumbed her phone and placed the takeout order without asking for my input. "Same as always?" she called from the hallway. The words stung in their intimacy, an arrow of routine aimed straight at the softest part of me. I cleaned the cutting board with near-fanatical thoroughness, unable to stop thinking about her phrase, "Keep him calm." As if I was livestock at slaughter, as if I might stampede. In truth, I felt calm, coldly, pathologically so. But the emotion hummed under the surface like a loose electrical wire. The sun was low now, throwing hard shadows across the tile. I heard Diana in the next room, her voice modulated for conversation with a friend or customer service. The new distance between us was an ache, but it was the kind you get from bad shoes, not a broken limb. Aching, yes, but entirely survivable. There was a time, years ago, when I would have confronted her, pounded the table, forced the issue. But I have learned that noise rarely fixes what silence has already ruined. Instead, I listened. I timed the interval between her sentences, noted the polite laughter, the way her voice lifted at the end of each phrase. It was the voice of a person rehearsing a narrative, aligning facts for later presentation. I set the kitchen in order, dishes rinsed, counters wiped. Detritus of dinner returned to the pantry, because even in collapse, I am a man who tidies. I waited until Diana's laughter faded before stepping into the hall. I paused by the door to her study, hand hovering just above the frame, then withdrew. It was not yet time to speak, not while she was still arranging the world in which I was merely a shared resource to be equitably divided. The rest of the evening unfurled as usual. We ate in the den, legs up on the ottoman, silent except for the brittle dialogue of a police procedural. Diana feigned interest, then excused herself early. I watched her go, marveling at the skill with which she had built the myth of our stability, only to dismantle it with 3 sentences and a businesslike tone. I replayed the conversation in my mind, isolating the words as if analyzing a forensic audio tape. I parsed every syllable for hidden meanings, but the message was unambiguous. The only shock was that there was no shock, only the precision of the cut and the absence of blood. At 11:04 p.m., as I brushed my teeth, I caught my reflection in the fogged mirror. 70 years had not made me wise, only stubborn. I thought of the men who sensed their endings, wondered if they, too, found solace in the clean lines of inevitability. I dried my face, squared my shoulders, and stepped into the dark, ready to learn what remained of me after the steam had cleared. It is one thing to be blindsided by an ambush in your own home, another to trace the origin of your wound. I spent the night counting every time I'd chosen duty over comfort, as if chronicling evidence for a coroner. I found myself reconstructing a ledger of the unbillable hours and invisible labor that make up the backbone of a family. There were the years I slept in shifts each winter, attuned to the choke and shudder of the old furnace. The heating man said we should replace it. A coffin on borrowed time, he called it. But the cost was astronomical, and our daughter needed braces. I learned the furnace's moods, the specific rattle it made before a flameout, the way the thermostat stuttered when the draft seal failed. Diana never asked about the midnight vigils, but she enjoyed the warm kitchen in the mornings, the coffee always ready before she came down. Weekends became a slow grind of maintenance. I patched the roof with black tar in the rain, a dance between ladder and slick shingles that left my hands cracked and raw. When wind peeled the soffit back, I reattached it with screws from the hardware bin, improvising a gasket out of old bicycle inner tube. I kept the basement dry with jury-rigged pumps and replaced sump hoses in the sleet. I told myself these acts were what husbands did, that the slow accumulation of minor injuries was a tax on my role. I never tallied the cost. In better years, I picked up overtime when the firm was flush, banking the extra hours against future requests. It was a point of pride to make the school payments on time, to afford the band trips that took our daughter all the way to state finals. I liked the way she'd show off her clarinet, eager and breathless, the reed still damp from rehearsal. I watched from the bleachers, always 3 rows up and 2 seats over from the 50-yard line, because I didn't want to embarrass her by being visible. When our daughter was blindsided by layoffs at the call center, I didn't hesitate to co-sign for her first apartment. I drove across town to sign the paperwork and lingered afterward, fixing the sticky window and leveling the fridge with improvised shims. Diana called these acts enabling, but I called it the last resort. Our daughter said she was grateful, but I knew the exact day she stopped answering my texts. It was a Tuesday, 3 years to the week before Diana's own Tuesday revelation. I pawned my tool chest, full set, Snap-on, a gift from my father, to help the kids finish their kitchen. Trevor had expensive taste in appliances, but no patience for deferred gratification. "We'll pay you back," he said, and maybe he believed it, but I never expected it. The chest fetched less than half its value, but I watched the realtor photos of their remodel with pride, spotting the new dishwasher like a secret badge. I did not mention the sacrifice, even when Diana asked why I worked from a cardboard box for the next 2 years. When Diana's mother was diagnosed, I took on the role of driver, nurse, and silent witness. I learned the maze of the oncology floor, remembered the names of the receptionists, packed protein shakes and crossword puzzles for the hours between consults. Diana handled the insurance calls and prescriptions, but I did the logistics. I was the quiet shadow in every waiting room, hands folded, back straight, ready to absorb the next impact. All this, and more, made up the silent architecture of our life. I had never once itemized these efforts, never framed them as a gift or a debt. They were simply the work of keeping things upright. I told myself that love was not the grand gesture, but the 10,000 unremarked tasks, groceries, oil changes, the patience to hold the tongue instead of unleashing it in the heat of an argument. Looking back, I see the outline of my own folly. I assumed that duty, performed well and without complaint, would purchase immunity from disaster. That's not how it works. There is no actuarial fairness in marriage. You pay, and then one day the bill comes due anyway. By dawn, I had run through the entire inventory of service and found it wanting. The house was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the baseboard heater ticking on. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black, and stood in the doorway to the backyard, watching the pale blue rim of morning approach. The phrase, "keep him calm," echoed in my ears, a diagnosis without a cure. Calm was my superpower, my curse. I realized that if Diana wanted a clean ending, I would give it to her, precise, methodical, and unassailable. But I would not go gently. If I was to be a resource, I would become an audit. I dressed for work that morning as if nothing had changed, buttoned the cuffs, straightened the tie, polished the shoes. I left the house before Diana came down, resisting the urge to leave a note. There was nothing left to explain. I had already paid the bill, and now I would see what, if anything, it was worth. Diana called in sick that morning, her voice as warm and untroubled as if she were reading a weather report. I waited until she'd left for the store before I began my work. The house was silent, neither refuge nor enemy, just a shell for the evidence I was about to assemble. At exactly 9:10 a.m., I sat at the kitchen table and wrote down, in the same spiral-bound pad I once used for grocery lists, every word I'd overheard the night before. I used the legal pad's blue margin for timestamps and the wide-ruled columns for attributions. Soft divorce, Trev. No courthouse drama. We'll split the money quietly and keep him calm. I circled the word calm twice, red ink for emphasis. Below it, I annotated Trevor's reply. No delays. I'll handle the account disclosures. I wrote the date, the exact location, and the fact that the conversation was conducted on speakerphone. My penmanship was steady. I found this reassuring, as if the world could still be recorded in straight lines and legible print. I moved next to the paperwork, photographing the most recent joint bank statements, with the same care I'd once used to record our daughter's marching band performances. I lined up the pages so that account numbers, balances, and headers were all visible, then stored the images in a hidden subfolder of my phone. I repeated this process for the insurance policy, the retirement plan, the deed to the house. Every document was logged, date-stamped, and uploaded to an encrypted cloud service I'd set up years ago in anticipation of a natural disaster. I hadn't imagined this disaster would come from inside the home. The estate binder was a gift from Diana on our 30th anniversary, a navy blue 3-ring with our initials embossed in the corner. She'd presented it with a flourish and a wink, joking that most men got a gold watch, but she was giving me permanence. I opened the binder now, careful not to bend the tabs. The will was still there, unsigned revision dated 3 years prior. The trust documents were pristine, untouched by legal review. The life insurance packet, however, was annotated in Diana's handwriting, her script looping and confident. Confirm beneficiary before next renewal. My name was still on the policy, but the ink was faded and the post-it note suggested a pending change. I didn't allow myself to linger on the sentimentality of her handwriting. Instead, I removed the pages, placed them in order, and scanned them into a new file on my desktop labeled Disclosures. I capitalized it out of spite or habit, I'm not sure which. The folder became a boundary, a line between the chaos of the unknown and the clarity of the documented. I reviewed each file twice, then set up a backup protocol to email copies to myself at 2 different addresses. In the process, I found receipts I'd forgotten about. A tuition down payment for our granddaughter's private school. A veterinary bill from the year our old dog got sick. The invoice for the tool chest I'd pawned. I added these to the archive. Every detail mattered now. Every decimal point and forgotten check number a defense against the narrative that was already forming in other rooms. I imagined how Diana and Trevor would frame it. Martin was always rigid. He didn't adapt well to change. Or, he made decisions unilaterally, didn't consider the family's needs. I could already hear the soft, regretful tone Diana would use with friends, the way she'd cast herself as caretaker to a man too set in his ways. Trevor would be clinical, referring to me as a legacy system that needed updating, if not outright replacement. The urge to confront them, to demand an explanation, rose and fell in me like a fever. Instead, I made a list of questions I would never ask. When did you decide I was obsolete? Was there a specific moment, or was it just a gradual erosion? Did you ever intend to tell me, or was this always going to be an ambush? The list was therapeutic, if not productive. I shredded it afterward, the paper curling in the wastebasket like strips of old wallpaper. By noon, the kitchen was as clean as a laboratory. Every countertop had been wiped down, every crumb swept from the tile. The evidence sat in the disclosures folder, organized and color-coded. I felt a grim satisfaction in this small act of control. If they wanted a soft divorce, they'd find it lined with barbed wire. I ate a ham sandwich at the table, the first meal I'd taken alone in years. I chewed methodically, stared at the salt shaker, and reviewed my next steps. The attorney, the passwords, the locks on the accounts. I would leave nothing to chance because chance was what had failed me. When Diana returned, arms full of groceries, she was chatty and solicitous. "I got your favorite crackers," she called from the entryway, her voice bright. I thanked her, wondering if she'd practiced the line on the drive home. I watched her unpack, hands moving with the same brisk competence that used to comfort me. Now it just looked like choreography, a performance for an audience that had already left the theater. I slipped upstairs to the office and double-checked the scans. Everything was in order. I sent a backup to my old work email, the one Trevor didn't know about. I printed a hard copy, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in my desk drawer under the chess set. By the time Diana called me down for dinner, the evidence was secured. The future could do its worst. I would be ready. I took my seat at the table, folded my hands, and waited for the next act to begin. Subscribe and share one line you wish you'd heard earlier. Someone will borrow it. The waiting room was a climate-controlled void, its only distinguishing feature a wall of framed law degrees and a faint antiseptic trace of citrus in the air. I arrived 10 minutes early, checked in with the receptionist, and let my eyes drift to the fish tank. The bottom feeder hovered motionless, lips working the gravel with mechanical resolve. I envied the clarity of its task. At 11:30 sharp, the inner door buzzed and Janelle Ortiz called my name. She was mid-40s, with hair pulled tight and a blazer so structured it could have doubled as a flak jacket. She shook my hand firmly, but not for show, then led me into an office that was both immaculate and deeply impersonal. "Have a seat, Mr. Keene," she said, voice warm but clipped. "You brought documents?" I placed the evidence on her desk in 3 stacks, the spiral-bound notes, the flash drive, and the hard copies of our financials. She appraised the arrangement, then looked at me. Not through me, as many professionals do, but directly, as if she were calibrating my emotional temperature. "Just so I'm clear, you haven't discussed this with Mrs. Keene?" she asked. "Not directly. She's making arrangements with her own team." My voice surprised me. Calm, dry, almost rehearsed. Janelle nodded, opening the notebook and scanning the first page. She paused at the phrase, "soft divorce," her pen hovering a millimeter above the margin, then made a small notation before continuing. "Do you anticipate a custody dispute?" she said, still reading. "We have one adult daughter. No minors, no pets. Real property? One home mortgaged but substantial equity. 2 cars, both paid off." She slid a checklist across the table. "Then the likely points of friction will be spousal maintenance, division of accounts, and," she glanced at my notes, "the handling of insurance, retirement, and possible legacy gifts." She tapped her pen twice. "Has there been a conversation about mediation versus litigation?" "Diana wants mediation. Her son-in-law is pushing for it too. Trevor, he's active in the process." Janelle's mouth twitched. Whether at the implication or the overfamiliarity of men like Trevor, I couldn't say. "You're smart to get ahead of this," she said. "In these situations, the first to document usually defines the facts." I watched her annotate my notes with quick, looping shorthand, each stroke amplifying the sense that my private life was now a case file. When she was done, she closed the folder with finality and looked up. "Here's how we proceed," she said. "First, I'll file a notice of separate counsel. That's a formal signal. No one contacts you directly, and anything Diana's people send comes through me. Second, we request mutual financial disclosures, full statements for every account, debt, and transfer for the last 90 days. Third, I'll draft a standstill letter for marital funds. No unusual withdrawals, no beneficiary changes, no cash advances without both signatures." She ticked off each point on her finger, like a surgeon walking through the steps of an operation. "Fourth, I contact your insurance agent and retirement broker and lock down any edits to beneficiaries. In-person signature only, plus a notary. Fifth, we add a password and 2-factor authentication to your joint bank accounts, plus a 24-hour hold on any transfer over $1,000. Janelle leaned back, crossing her arms. "It'll feel like overkill, but trust me, it's standard. These are best practices for high-conflict or high-net-worth cases. You'd be shocked how fast things disappear once the process is public." I nodded, absorbing the plan. For the first time since the phone call, I felt a flicker of control, cold comfort, but better than none. She watched me for a moment. "You're handling this better than most. Just don't let them spook you into agreeing to anything without review. If there's something you want to keep, tell me now." I thought of the chess set in my office, the only heirloom I cared about, and the garage with its empty shelf where my tool chest once lived. "Just the house," I said. "I'd prefer not to leave before it's over." "Then you won't," she said, writing it down. "If the temperature rises, I can request temporary occupancy. But for now, you're safe." She gathered the stacks, tapped them even, and placed them in a legal-size folder. "You'll get a full summary by tonight, plus forms to sign. If you have other records, send them my way. The more comprehensive, the less leverage they have." I stood to go, feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. At the door, Janelle paused. "One more thing. You're not alone, even if it feels that way. This is what I do, and we keep it clean. No surprises, for you or for a judge." I thanked her, not knowing what else to say. The elevator ride down was silent except for the faint hum of the cables and the soft shuffle of papers in my hand. I walked into the parking lot and sat in my car for a minute, letting the air conditioner run on low. I was in new territory now, a place mapped only by rules, filings, and the relentless pursuit of fairness. The phone buzzed. A new email from Janelle. Subject line, "Your case. First steps." I opened it, scanned the bullet points, and exhaled. The world had not ended. Not yet. But it had been itemized, digitized, and logged in a way that felt both surgical and irrevocable. I drove home on autopilot, hands at 10 and 2, waiting for the first true sign of turbulence. There would be more meetings, more disclosures, more forms to complete. But for now, I had a record, a proof of existence, at least on paper. That would have to do. The email arrived Thursday morning. Subject line, "Settlement Pathways." Janelle had distilled our options into a single, ruthless paragraph. Your spouse has two choices. Engage in transparent mediation with a certified neutral, or proceed via immediate court motion for temporary orders. The tone was professional but unyielding, as if daring the recipient to find ambiguity. I read the letter twice and then forwarded it to Diana's email. Within the hour, a response pinged my phone. Not a formal reply, but a text. Short, lowercase, stripped of all pretense. "Mediation is best. Want to keep it kind." There was a time when kind would have soothed me, a balm against the entropy of aging and disappointment. Now it stung. The word a paper cut on the edge of civility. I imagined her composing it, thumb hovering over the keyboard, weighing whether to add a smiley face or let the period hang as a full stop. She chose the period. I considered responding with a single letter, K, but thought better of it. Instead, I picked up a Sharpie and in block capitals labeled the newest folder kind equals paper. I underlined it twice. There would be no negotiations off the record, no verbal understandings. If it wasn't documented, it didn't exist. The mediation date was set for the following Monday. The neutral was an ex-judge with a reputation for reading between the lines, but never beyond them. I prepped a binder with tabs for every conceivable point of friction. Home equity, retirement, insurance, even the chess set. I made an inventory of disputed items and appended it with printouts of text messages and call logs. I rehearsed my opening statement in the shower, dry and factual. I'm here for a fair split. Nothing more, nothing less. Trevor tried to reach out once, sending a LinkedIn message of all things. "Hey, wanted to check in before next week. Hope we can resolve this amicably." I deleted it without reply. There was no scenario in which we would ever be colleagues, collaborators, or even rivals. He was not my opposite number. He was a complication to be managed, and eventually subtracted. Diana maintained her routines with studied perfection. She made French press coffee on Saturday, pre-dawn, just as I liked it. She left my favorite crackers in the pantry, restocked the toothpaste, paid the power bill ahead of schedule. These gestures, once invisible acts of love, now felt like the final audit of our marriage, balancing the books before closing the account. I filled the hours before mediation with paperwork. I updated passwords, double-checked the financial statements, even set up a separate checking account for my post-divorce existence. I organized my files by color and priority, the act itself a sedative. If I kept busy, I could ignore the sense of my life collapsing into a series of PDFs and bullet points. Sunday night, I reviewed the game plan one last time. Janelle would open with a demand for full transparency. I would remain silent except to confirm facts or correct errors. No offers, no concessions, no warmth. The rules were simple. Nothing conceded without reciprocal value, nothing assumed unless in writing. I braced for Diana's kindness, knowing it would be as precise and calculated as any legal tactic. I slept in the guest room, the binder propped against the nightstand like a shield. In the dark, I traced the words on the spine. Kind equals paper, and tried to remember what kindness used to mean. before it became just another form of paperwork. The envelope was thicker than I expected. It arrived Monday morning, hand-delivered by courier, and bore the discreet logo of Diana's Counsel, a firm I didn't recognize but immediately distrusted. I opened it at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd once sorted college acceptance letters and Christmas cards. Now the surface was reserved for the finer points of disengagement. The disclosure packet was a model of transparency, color-coded tabs for checking, savings, brokerage, and debts, bullet points in the margins, highlighter in 3 different shades. I read each line as if it might contain the secret to my undoing. The first anomaly appeared on page 4. A new credit card, opened in Diana's name 3 weeks prior. The limit was $12,000, generous but not extravagant. No charges yet, only a transfer balance that mirrored the closing amount on one of our joint cards. I made a note in the margin, preparing for single credit status. Next came the Zelle transfers, 2 in rapid succession, each to our daughter's account. One for $1,800, one for $3,000. The memo fields were terse, tuition support, and emergency dental, but the timing was suspect. Both within a week of the first legal notice. I felt a dull ache behind my eyes, the kind that precedes a migraine. I reminded myself, nothing is done without a reason. The real punch landed in the brokerage statement, a $12,000 sweep labeled household reimbursement, executed the same morning Diana announced her sick day. I pictured her on the phone, voice honeyed for customer service, reciting my social security number from memory. I wondered if she'd felt anything at the moment of the transfer, or if it was just another task on the to-do list. I tabbed every irregularity, then scanned the packet to Janelle with a single-line note. See highlights. Confirm next steps. She replied within an hour, her response clipped but thorough. Will prepare memo for mediation. Recommend request for return or credit of disputed amounts. Drafting status quo order, details to follow. The status quo order was a legal airlock. Mortgage, utilities, and insurance to be paid exactly as before. No new debts, no asset sales, no third-party fintech apps linked to joint accounts. Janelle's language was surgical. Preserve financial conditions pending resolution. Any deviations to be flagged and addressed in session. I could almost hear her voice, dry, unsentimental, but with an undertone of, don't let them get away with anything. I printed the relevant pages and added them to the mediation binder. The folder was bulging now, its color-coded tabs like warning flags in a field of snow. I rehearsed the talking points in my head, anticipating every counter-argument and preemptive strike. The logic was simple. If they wanted transparency, they would get it. Every transfer, every receipt, every whispered memo. Diana, for her part, acted as if nothing had changed. She made polite conversation at dinner, even complimented my choice of wine. The surface was smooth, but I sensed the tension beneath. She no longer lingered in the kitchen after meals, no longer touched my shoulder in passing. If there was regret, she concealed it well. If there was calculation, it was flawless. Trevor's name surfaced in one of the Zelle memos. Consult fee T. I scanned the bank records, found a matching transfer from our daughter to Trevor's business account. The chain was tight, the loop closed. I felt a surge of something, anger maybe, or just the satisfaction of being right about him all along. The night before mediation, I triple-checked the files. I printed 2 sets, one for me and one for the neutral. I reviewed Janelle's email. Do not deviate from documented facts. Do not concede on first offer. Remain civil, but do not engage in informal discussion. You are there to observe, document, and respond in writing. I imagined the conference room, the water pitcher, the stack of legal pads, the ex-judge with her glasses perched at the tip of her nose. I pictured Diana across the table, hands folded, eyes bright with practiced empathy. I pictured myself, gray, worn, but invulnerable inside my armor of documentation. I went to bed early, binder propped against the nightstand, and let the numbers lull me to sleep. In the dream, I was back at the furnace in the basement, tuning the pilot light, while the house creaked above me. Every click of the thermostat was a heartbeat. Every line on the ledger a tally of what I'd saved and what I'd lost. When I woke, the house was cold, but the facts were in order. I was ready. The mediation suite was tucked behind a dental clinic, its windows frosted for privacy, and its decor a monument to enforced neutrality. I arrived 10 minutes early, binder in hand, and was escorted to Conference Room B, a box of glass and gray carpet with a table the color of old bone. The mediator was already there, standing with her back to the window. She introduced herself as Miss Helm, her handshake brisk, her ink-blue glasses the only flare of color in an otherwise washed-out world. Diana entered next, trailing a scent of lavender and the soft click of new heels. She wore her hair up, a style reserved for weddings and depositions. Trevor followed, positioning himself directly behind her chair, arms folded, posture radiating containment. I noted the choreography and understood. This was not about support, but about interposition. Ms. Helm gestured for us to sit. "We'll start with ground rules," she said, voice as smooth as a voicemail prompt. "All communication is confidential. No recordings unless agreed." I held up my phone, screen already set to voice memo, and asked, "Objection?" Ms. Helm nodded. "So long as everyone is aware." Diana glanced at Trevor. He shrugged. I pressed record. I arranged my materials in 3 stacks: bank confirmations, the email printouts from Janelle, and the highlighted disclosure packet. I placed them side by side, a triptych of defense. I watched Diana's eyes dart to the stacks, then away. Trevor's gaze never left me. "Opening statements," said Ms. Helm. She turned to Diana. Diana clasped her hands, the knuckles whitening just perceptibly. "We're here because we want to resolve this with dignity and respect. I believe we can agree on most things, and where we disagree, I trust the process." She looked at me then, and for a moment I caught a glint of something, remorse maybe, or fatigue. Trevor spoke next. "We're just trying to make it easy," he said, as if the matter were a customer service call. "There's no need for hostilities." My turn. I kept my hands flat on the table, steadying them with effort. Easy is not quiet. Easy is clear. I'm here for a fair split, nothing more. I have no interest in drama, but I want the facts on record. Ms. Helm smiled, small and professional. "Good. We'll proceed point by point, starting with the standstill agreement." She read from Janelle's letter, each clause precise and unyielding. No transfers from joint accounts without both signatures. All logins to be reset in person. No changes to insurance or retirement without notarized consent. No asset sales. No new lines of credit. No creative financial tools to be used as workarounds. Each point was ticked off, initialed, and signed. When we reached the disclosures, Ms. Helm asked if either party disputed the numbers. Diana shook her head. Trevor did not speak. I pointed to the Zelle transfers and the brokerage sweep. "These are out of the ordinary," I said. "I want them returned or credited in the final accounting." Trevor leaned forward, voice suddenly cold. "They were household expenses, not misappropriation." "Then there's no issue documenting them as such," I replied. Ms. Helm wrote a note. "Both parties acknowledge the transactions. Final disposition to be determined in settlement." She moved on. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of small print and notary stamps. Every deviation from status quo was flagged and logged. Every argument reduced to a line item for later review. Diana offered concessions on some points: her car, the unused gym membership, but dug in on others. Trevor whispered to her occasionally, his lips barely moving. I ignored him, fixing my attention on the mediator's pen. By the end, the table was littered with signed forms and spent ballpoint pens. Ms. Helm recapped the agreements in a monotone. Temporary rules in effect until further notice. All disputes to be handled via email, CCing both attorneys. Next session scheduled in 2 weeks. She closed her folder with a soft click. Thank you for your civility. Diana lingered a moment, her eyes on the stack of papers. I thought she might say something, but she gathered her purse and left without a word. Trevor followed, pausing at the door just long enough to meet my gaze. His expression was blank, almost bored, but the message was clear. I am done with you. I sat in the empty room for several minutes, watching the sunlight crawl across the table. I replayed the entire mediation in my head, searching for cracks or missed opportunities. There were none. The process was airtight, the outcome inevitable. I should have felt triumphant, but the only sensation was a numbness, cold and complete. I shut off the voice memo, gathered my files, and walked out into the too-bright corridor. For a moment, I wanted to call someone, my daughter maybe, or Janelle, but the urge faded before I reached the parking lot. There was nothing to say that was not already on record. At home, I placed the signed standstill order in the fireproof safe, then sat in the dark with a glass of water and watched the condensation bead and run down the side. In the morning, I would wake and repeat the process. But for now, all that remained was the echo of Trevor's silence and the hollow victory of having everything documented, and nothing left to salvage. 2 weeks vanished in a cycle of emails, voicemails, and notarized signatures. The reconciliation report arrived on a Tuesday, as if fate had a sense of symmetry. I opened it at the kitchen table, the same place where all of this began, and read it cover to cover with the detachment of a third-party auditor. The $12,000 sweep was returned to the joint account, line-itemed as corrective transfer per mediation. The $4,800 Zelle to our daughter was formally acknowledged, labeled Advance Against Future Distribution. The new card, the one Diana had opened in her name, was already closed. The balance read 0. I noted the precision, the neatness of it all, and wondered if I had ever truly understood my own marriage. The next day, I visited the bank in person. The manager met me at the door, shaking my hand with both of hers, a gesture of respect, or perhaps condolence. She didn't speak until I gave the password, even though she had watched me cross the lobby. Every transaction required dual authentication. Every change, a cooling-off period. The bank's confidence in humanity was gone, replaced by protocol and protective layers. I signed the new account agreement, initials at every page, then left with a stack of paperwork that felt heavier than money. The insurance company called, just to confirm. Beneficiary unchanged, the agent said. Future edits will require you in the branch, with ID and a notary present. The voice was cheerful but metallic, as if the call were being made by a benevolent algorithm. I thanked her, then hung up and deleted the number from my phone. There would be no further need for conversation. At home, I placed the estate binder inside the fire safe in the basement. I taped the standstill order to the inside door, a talisman against entropy, or maybe just a warning to anyone who found it later. The binder fit perfectly, leaving just enough space for a chess set or a stack of old letters. I considered what else belonged in the safe, but the answer was nothing. Everything worth protecting was already gone, or reduced to a string of account numbers and legal forms. The house felt different now, stripped of its rituals and routines. Diana had moved her things to the guest room, her presence reduced to a scent on the pillow and the faint clatter of her laptop keys behind closed doors. Our daughter called once, nervous and apologetic, asking if I needed anything. I told her I was fine, and meant it in the narrowest possible sense. I spent my days organizing the garage, discarding what no longer served a purpose. I donated the last of the power tools, repurposed shelves for storage, and swept the concrete twice weekly, just to see the dust settle. I learned the rhythms of the empty house, the tick of the baseboard heater, the slow gurgle of the hot water pipe, the way sunlight crept across the kitchen tile at noon. Some evenings I would sit at the dining table with a glass of water and read through the mediation binder, not because I expected any surprises, but because the act of review brought a measure of peace. The facts were static, unchanging. The rest of life was noise. I taped the final reconciliation summary to the inside of the fire safe, just above the binder. It wasn't trust, not really. It was the best I could do. The house was silent now, but the world outside kept moving. I found this comforting. There was still a furnace to maintain, a lawn to mow, taxes to pay. The work never ended, but at least it could be measured. I closed the safe, spun the dial, and listened for the click. It was a clean, satisfying sound. For the first time in months, I let myself exhale. The pen I used was a cheap blue ballpoint, the kind Diana favored for lists and annotations. I started the letter on a Saturday afternoon, the house empty but for the tick of the wall clock and the slow churn of the dishwasher. I took my time, drafting and redrafting, because if this was to be our last correspondence, it deserved the same care I once gave to love notes, years and years ago. I began with the facts: our wedding date, the first house, the birth of our daughter. I detailed the milestones that had anchored us, the backyard barbecues, the road trips, the way Diana laughed when she won at gin rummy. I wrote about the early years, when everything felt possible, and about the long middle, when habit and duty became indistinguishable from affection. I listed the times I failed her, the arguments I dragged out, the moments I let anger calcify into silence. I acknowledged the distance that grew between us, slow as root rot, invisible until it cracked the foundation. I did not mention Trevor by name, but I referenced the summer she spent in Phoenix, how she returned with a different sense of time, less urgency, more drift. I described the day of the kettle, 6:03 p.m., the steam, the way the word soft landed like a verdict. I did not ask her why. I did not ask her to reconsider. I simply mapped the moment as a fact, a turning point in the ledger of our life. I wrote about the disclosures folder, how it came to represent not just what we had lost, but what we were fighting to protect. I explained that I did not blame her for wanting clarity, or even for wanting escape. I wrote that I understood the comfort of paperwork, the solace of knowing every variable before the first move was made. I referenced the blue ink signatures, the ones we placed on the standstill order, the mediation agreements, the bank documents. I said they reminded me of the night we signed the first mortgage, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, laughing as we initialed every page. Even then, I wrote, the signatures felt like a promise. Maybe they still did, in a different way. I did not offer forgiveness. That was never the point. Instead, I offered terms. I wrote, I am willing to try counseling, if only to learn the language of peace. I will not discuss settlements outside of official channels. Sundays at 2 remain open for family, but all financial matters will go through Janelle or the mediator. No exceptions. Please respect the boundaries. It is the only way I know to keep this clean. I closed the letter without a flourish, just my name in the same blue ink as every agreement that had brought us to this point. I folded the pages with care, slid them into an envelope, and left it on the table, next to the French press and her favorite cup. When Diana came home that evening, she saw it but said nothing. She made tea, read the letter at the counter, and placed it in her purse. The following day was Sunday. At 2 p.m. sharp, I set the table for 3. Coffee, pastries, the chess set, polished and reset. Our daughter arrived first, followed by Diana, who brought a carton of strawberries and a tentative smile. We sat together, talked about the weather, the oddities of hybrid work, the price of gas. The air was different, clean maybe, or just emptied of all the things we used to hide beneath the surface. No one mentioned the standstill, or the safe, or the letter. There was no need. Everything was already documented. Afterward, as the house returned to its normal silence, I wondered if this was what survival looked like. 2 lives split at the root, still growing in parallel, tethered by the memory of what once was. I didn't know if it was enough, but it was honest, and that would have to do. I rinsed the cups, wiped the table, and sat for a long time in the kitchen, listening to the clock and the faint hum of the dishwasher. Outside, dusk was falling, and the street was empty. I thought of the men who sense their endings before they arrive, and wondered if any of them found solace in the tidy logic of a ledger balanced, even as the world moved on without them. I decided to leave the blue pen on the counter, just in case. If any of this rings true, subscribe and leave 1 sentence. The boundary you'll set this week.